I want to express, of course, my sincere delight and gratitude of being included in this intake to the Victorian Media Hall of Fame. It's extremely humbling to be elevated into the company of so many illustrious past practitioners of our craft. I'm reminded of a character in Woody Allen's film Midnight in Paris, who somehow found himself consorting after dark with Hemingway, Picasso, Cole Porter, Salvador Dali, Gertrude Stein, Scott Fitzgerald, and other legends from the 20s. I can realise now a little of his overwhelming sense of wonder and awe, because tonight I feel similarly in the company of idols and giants of the past. The roll call of just a few members of the Hall of Fame that I've been privileged to join tonight almost deserves a drum roll. The names from last year's intake include John Pascoe Faulkner, Alfred Deakin, Prime Minister, Keith Murdoch, Damien Pereira, excuse me, William Lambie, Chinese Morrison, Alan Moorhead, Chester Wilmot, Hugh Buggy, David Syme, Joe Melvin, and they're just a few. This year, some of the membership is generally from a later era and a bit closer to being contemporary for this octogenarian anyway. I've known many in this year's list, like the late, much-loved Keith Dunstan. I've worked with or against a number, like Graham Perkin. I've admired, even idolised, some from a distance, like Osmo White. And I've had a few special friends, like Ron Casey and Dick Hughes. One person in, I think, all of our minds tonight is Keith Dunstan, who was to have been one of the 4 living members of the Hall of Fame. It was a massive privilege to work with Keith, to be his friend and also his editor in both Melbourne and Brisbane. His writing style was a blend of the simple, the elegant, and the whimsical. At his best, using those variations, he wrote so very sweetly, rather the way Miles Davis played trumpet, and Keith made it sound so very easy. He was a generous friend. Once, a long time ago, after we'd both written a couple of books, our publishers told us that the Melbourne Cricket Club wanted to commission a history, and our 2 names had been mentioned. In fact, submitted. I knew Keith would be preferred. He had been a respected long-time member of the MCC. He'd written wittily about cricket. I wasn't even a member of the club, and I'd never written cricket. But I wrote down a title I fancied on a piece of copy paper and took it across to him from at his desk, which was not far from mine. The words on it were "The Paddock That Grew." Keith used them, of course, for the title, and of course made a beautiful job of the history. It was very characteristic of that urbane man, his grace, that in later speeches and articles he emphasised and gave credit to what had been a very small contribution from a writer who didn't get the commission. I do congratulate the Melbourne Press Club and the Monash University on their great initiative in establishing the Media Hall of Fame. And it's gratifying to know from John Wiley and Michael Smith excuse me, that it will soon have a permanent home in the State Library with portraits and a commemorative book to come. This city along with many towns of regional Victoria, has a rich media heritage. It's one which began with an inkwell and a nib and some paper when Faulkner founded the first paper, whose text for the first 9 issues was handwritten by himself. That's when he wasn't too busy serving strong drink behind the bar of his hotel, which was on the corner of William Street and Flinders Lane. That heritage, entrenched early in newspapers, but along the way embraced in television and radio and magazines and other journals. It deserves to be preserved and celebrated. It spreads across some golden eras of journalism over a couple of centuries. I was lucky enough to dip a toe into one of those eras. When I began at the Melbourne Sun, it was the Melbourne Sun News Pictorial, but we called it the Melbourne Sun, in 1949. In those days, we had 3 vigorously competing morning newspapers, the Sun, the Age and the Argus, and an excellent afternooner in the Herald. A few years before that, another fine afternoon paper, the Star, had existed. It possessed an appropriately stellar staff, many of whom went on to build great reputations in journalism around the world. The Star died in 1936. The Argus, whose first edition was published in June 1846, died in 1957. Newspapers as we knew them in what I can describe as the day of Dunstan and Perkin and myself have been dying or suffering severe wounds over several decades now. I know a digital revolution is occurring and that social media have a buoyant future. I know wonderful challenges exist and loom. But I'm glad that I was part of the industry when I was. I've thoroughly enjoyed my life in journalism. Excuse me, I've got a frog. I began writing when I was 16, and I'm still doing it. If I had to nominate the most stimulating period of all, it was my 5-year stint as editor of The Sun. At times it became very close to being exhilarating. One of the things I liked best was taking what might be called bold initiatives or playing out hunches. Some of those involved giving opportunities to people. One such event came when I sent an untried young newspaper to federal politics to Canberra as our political editor. It wasn't received all that well. His name was Laurie Oakes and he was 23. It upset a few people at the time, even caused one resignation. But I never had cause to regret what had been seen as a gamble, and I don't think Laurie has either. It was a fiercely competitive time as Graham Perkin, enjoying the significant backing of Ranald MacDonald, continued to explore new frontiers with the Age. Ranald once referred to the two of us as shirt sleeves editors, but I think we were. My relationship with Graham was interesting. It involved the swapping of the odd bottle of champagne and the dodging of the odd incoming expletive. Twice during my career as a correspondent, I've moved virtually from covering a war, not virtually, from covering a war, to covering an Olympic Games. From the Korean front in 1950-51 to Helsinki for the Games in 1952. From the Algerian War of Independence in early 1960 to the Rome Olympics in mid-1960. I think each time I was coming from a savage battlefield where people were intent on killing each other and doing it pretty well, to an Olympic village in which the overwhelming mood was one of peace and mutual goodwill. The difference in atmosphere was profound. I didn't experience any kind of Damascus Road conversion, but I have no doubt that those experiences, those contrasts, increased my appreciation and admiration for the Olympic movement. I've covered quite a few games, and after I said goodbye to daily newspaper work, I was invited to cover more for AAP, where I'd been chairman at a certain time, and for the Australian. For the last 20 years, I think it was about 20 years ago that John Coates suggested to me, or it might have been the other way around, that I should record the history, become the official historian of the Australian Olympic movement. And I'm glad that, well, first, for the last, that's 20 years, I've been doing that, but I've also been writing books and taking on many other tasks. But I'm very glad that John Coates is here tonight with members of my family, because he's been a wonderful person to work with. Tonight, as I enter the best club I could ever have hoped to join, it's tempting to reflect to a very small degree, in a very personal way, on the kind of generational change that exists and is reflected in the Hall of Fame's chronological approach to these intakes. When my son Michael started work on Graham Perkins' age, and we had a mutual agreement, I should tell you, that about our sons not working on our papers. So Steve came to the Herald and Weekly Times, Michael went to The Age. But Michael was then usually referred to as Harry Gordon's son. These days, if I'm referred to at all in journalistic discourse, it's generally as Michael Gordon's father. And I love it that way. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to keep you up here as well a bit longer, Harry. I'd also like to acknowledge that your wife Joy and your daughter Sally are here with Michael as well. So welcome to all of you.
And Robin's wife.
And Robin's wife.
And Michael's wife. Yeah.
And Michael's wife. So I want to ask you about that fierce rivalry you mentioned with Graham Perkin. Mike Smith referred to it as really the golden age of journalism. How much did that forge you as a journalist and editor?
It was a very interesting period. We had a very civilised kind of relationship in that we were very generous with each other in our gestures. And Graham, for instance, when The Sun had its 50th anniversary, and we published a very good commemorative issue, he wrote an editorial in The Age praising the opposition. That doesn't happen much these days.
Never.
And when Douglas Wilkie and I were called before the Borough of the House, the Legislative Council, and charged with contempt of Parliament, there was a vigorous editorial in The Age defending our situation, our stance, because we both refused to apologise. We had, and I similarly made often pretty good gestures to Graham. I remember when I did receive an award for the road safety campaign from the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, I paid tribute to what The Age had done with its Minus Children campaign. So there was a degree of bonhomie, but it didn't always work like that. There were two cases I'd like to tell you about. One was there was a football situation once when there's a football, I don't know whether anybody can remember a Carlton footballer called Adrian Gaggs Gallagher. Well, Ron Barassi had just gone to Carlton to take over the coaching, and Gallagher was very upset at the way he's being treated. He's being treated the way Harry Hopman used to treat his young charges a long time before. If there was any misdemeanour, he'd have to run around the oval 50 times, or if he'd have to do 150 press-ups. And we found that Lou Richards, who I spoke to today, by the way, but Lou and his ghost at the time, Tom Pryor, knew that Gallagher was absolutely angry about this, but was forbidden to talk to the press by Ron Barassi. And Ron Barassi was a dear friend of mine. I'd hired him to write a column called Column 31, which was the number on his back. So he rang me about 9 o'clock on the night that before we were going to publish this story. What had happened is that Lou and his ghost arranged to meet Adrian Gallagher's fiancée. She wasn't bound by Ron Barassi's rules, and so she opened up massively. And Ron rang me and said, "Harry, are you going to write this? You're going to run this story?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I just want you to know that if you do, your reporters will never be allowed into the Carlton football ground again, not into our press box." There was a custom then, training was on Tuesday and Thursday nights. "We'll never give you the injuries or the teams that are selected on Thursday nights. And what's more, I'll never write for the Sun again." And I got a call from, I said to Ron, he said, what do you think about this? And I said, "Well, I was going to put it on the back page, Ron, but we're now going to kick it off on the front page." And about half an hour later, I got a call from Graham Perkin. He just said, "Harry, don't worry about the teams, we'll give you the teams. Don't worry about the injuries, we'll give you the injuries." And so there was that lovely spirit existed between us. But on a certain night it didn't. On grand final night in 1972, the chap rang police rounds, and our reporter Wayne Grant took the call. And it was about 4:30 in the afternoon. And he said, "I just want you to know I've just kidnapped a school and I want $1 million ransom." And it's a pretty big story. So I said, "Look, will you tell Mick Miller," who was the Chief Commissioner then, and Mick Miller wanted it secret, "will you take off now, take Joe Rollo with you, and get a decent picture of those kids?" So along the way, it was about 115 k's north of Melbourne, a place called Faraday. And our reporters got there. We had a rule at the Herald and Weekly Times then where if you got a news story, you had to tell the radio and television, 3GB and HSV7. But I said, "We're not going to tonight, we're keeping this quiet." It was really a beautiful scoop at the time. So Wayne Grant got to Faraday, Skirley, the kids in the school were missing. The chap who'd made the call, a fellow named Eastwood, had gone off in a van with his school teacher called Mary Gibbs and 6 little children. And what Wayne did was, what I asked him to do was to get pictures of the whole classroom and come back. And still, the story had not been broken anywhere. It was just miraculous that it was kept so silent. So finally, Wayne got back to the office with a lovely picture of 6 lovely kids and Mary Gibbs, the school teacher. And It still hadn't been reported on radio or anywhere. And it was a stone cold, beautiful scoop. And about 11 o'clock, I got a call from Graham. And he said, "Harry, I believe you got a picture of those kidnapped school kids." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I want you to give it to me." And I said, "No." And he said, "Look," and he pleaded, as you would. He said, "It could save a child's life." And I said, "Graham, how could it save a child's life for me to give a picture to you?" And he said, and he finally slammed down, he said some very, that's where I mentioned some epithets before, slammed down the phone after some choice words. And there was a chap who later worked at The Sun called Ron Holdsworth, who was beside him at the time. And he told me that the epithets continued long after the conversation did. So what Graham did that night was he finally got the first edition of The Sun, which had the picture right across the front page. And he did something very bold. He re-photographed our front page. And in doing so, re-photographed the photograph, which was a little grainier, but that added to that doesn't hurt. And he ran it very big across the front page of The Age. And I just thought, what a wonderful, bold way to approach this thing. I really did. As a matter of fact, Ranald will recall, we had, after Graham died, we had a group of us, about 6 people who knew him pretty well, paid tribute for the National Library. And I said in that recording that if our situations had been reversed, I would hope I would have behaved in the bold, strong, aggressive manner that Graham Perkin did. That was the kind of editor he was. He was very, very competitive. So was I.
And just very quickly, I just wanted to ask you as well about that other great contribution you've made, not necessarily to journalism, but Victoria and Australia generally, that Declare War on 1034 campaign. Did you have any idea at all about the lives it had saved when you launched the campaign?
No, I think what the initial intent was to change community attitudes. I got home from an overseas trip, and there were about 6 young people, teenagers, killed in a road accident. And what disturbed me, and that following weekend something similar happened, what disturbed me was that nobody was angry about it. There would be the awful story on the Monday morning, some sad follow-ups during the week, but by the following weekend people were killing themselves again, and it needed some restraint. So that was the initial attitude, the initial intent was to change community attitudes. What I didn't realise is that in doing so, we also managed to change politicians' attitudes, because 2 people who were in power at the time were Sir Henry Bolte and Sir Arthur Rylah, and they both were not in favour of seatbelts. They thought there were no votes. They thought that because it restricted, because it was a restriction on human rights, I suppose, that it would be bad at the ballot box. But we demonstrated the reverse, and that's how. So it was not in my mind. My mind at the time was simply to reduce, and we did some wonderful things. It was a very passionate campaign, Michael. And there were one day, for instance, at Red Cliffs, which is near Mildura, on a football field, 1,034 people. We got them to lie down for us and took a photograph from above and ran it right across the middle pages, saying, this is what a year's death toll is like. And we were doing imaginative things of that nature, and we had a very good crew of feature writers and photographers, reporters working on it, and it was a beautiful campaign to be associated with.
That's it. And just very quickly, it's been a very good year for Harry because not only have you won this great award, you're also the official historian for a period for the Hawks. So you've done a great, great double as well. Ladies and gentlemen, please acknowledge Harry Gordon. Thank you very much. You want to come down the stairs?